The deeper we examine the current political landscape, the clearer it becomes that we have become our own worst enemy. The political elite have constructed a system in which they not only orchestrate crises, but also dictate the narrow scope of response available to the American people. Nowhere is this more evident than in the crisis of illegal immigration, a manufactured catastrophe in which millions upon millions of undocumented individuals have been funneled into the United States under the guise of compassion, only for those responsible to then impose a strategically limited range of solutions. Consider the sheer audacity of the rhetoric surrounding immigration enforcement. The very politicians who flung open our borders, allowing an unchecked mass influx of illegal immigrants, now claim that any attempt to restore order must be painstakingly surgical, removing only the so-called worst of the worst.
ICE agents raided a business in our city without a warrant. When I got this information, I was appalled.
Meanwhile, Democrats on Capitol Hill are preparing to fight back against policies proposed under Trump's second term.
Stephen Miller and Tom Homan were the architects of a lot of the first Trump administration horrific immigration policies. And so family separation, mass detentions, those kinds of things is what was promised and by the Trump administration, and I think what we're going to have to fight.
A definition, of course, dictated by the same people who orchestrated the invasion to begin with. And as if that weren't outrageous enough, these same power-hungry elites have deliberately embedded criminals among the broader illegal population.
We have been preparing strategy, looking at the law, analyzing Project 2025, looking at jurisdiction, looking at venue, and we are prepared to respond to defend the sovereignty of the state of New York.
Ensuring that any effort to enforce immigration laws is suffocated under layers of bureaucratic red tape and legal obstacles designed to make real action all but impossible. Meanwhile, American children, the future of this nation, are cast aside, forced to take a backseat to the children of those who had no right to be here in the first place. Public education, once a cornerstone of opportunity for American families, has been hijacked. It no longer serves the interests of the citizens who fund it. Instead, it has been repurposed as an indoctrination pipeline for those who fled in illegally, while hardworking parents, who can't afford private alternatives, watch their children's futures sacrificed at the altar of political agendas.
So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world, and we're ranked at the bottom of the list. We're ranked very badly. And what I want to do is let the states run schools. I believe strongly in school choice, but in addition to that, I want the states to run schools.
The political elite and their bureaucratic enforcers have misappropriated the sovereignty of the United States, deliberately shifting the debate from one of national security to one of protecting immigrant communities. In doing so, they have framed opposition to their agenda as inherently unjust, leaving the average American citizen with little recourse beyond empty rhetoric. This is by design. They've rewritten the rules of engagement to ensure that their policies remain untouched, while dissent is silenced under the weight of procedural entrapment. It's time to flip the script. The American people must reject the artificial constraints placed upon them and introduce a new framework, one in which accountability is imposed not only on illegal entrants, but also on those who enabled this disaster. The same bureaucrats who have made careers off the backs of American taxpayers while subverting national interests must have their lives upended in a meaningful way. The days of hiding behind government immunity must come to an end. Individual responsibility must be imposed on those in government as aggressively as they have imposed burdens on the American citizen. Public officials who have facilitated this crisis must be held personally liable for the consequences of their actions. This means stripping them of their government-provided legal shields and making them personally susceptible to lawsuits for any malfeasance or negligence that results in harm to the citizens they were sworn to serve.
In the context of sovereign immunity, which means that the government, state and federal, cannot be sued without its consent. Amar notes that the Supreme Court has used this as an excuse to deny proper remedies to citizens.
These officials should be required to defend themselves using their own resources, not taxpayer funds. Some will argue that such measures would deter individuals from entering public service, leaving the government understaffed and dysfunctional. But this is the same hollow argument used to justify mass illegal immigration. Who will pick our fruit?
You see, even in Florida, some of the farmers and the growers saying, why are you shipping these immigrants up north? We need them to pick the crops down here.
Just as America does not need an unchecked flood of undocumented laborers to function, it does not need career bureaucrats who operate with impunity, enriching themselves at the expense of their constituents. Sanctuary cities cannot be allowed to set the rules of engagement while simultaneously refusing to enforce the very laws they swore to uphold. These jurisdictions have long operated under a framework of selective enforcement, choosing which laws to obey based on ideological convenience. The American people are now being told that they must adhere to a legal strategy dictated by those who actively facilitated this invasion, one that allows only a piecemeal ineffective response rather than a wholesale reversal of the damage done. This is an absurdity that must be rejected outright. Now, within these so-called sanctuary cities, when you turn on the news, you're confronted with the harsh reality of this unlawful invasion unfolding before your eyes. Mobs of illegal immigrants, emboldened and unchallenged, flooding the streets, burning the American flag, and defiantly waving the Mexican flag in its place. This is not a peaceful migration of individuals seeking to integrate and embrace American values. It's a hostile occupation met with nothing but silence and inaction from those sworn to protect this nation. Adding to this disgrace, we now have Mexican cartel bosses now embedded in these communities, openly ordering their foot soldiers to target and assassinate U.S. Border Patrol agents, brazenly declaring war on those who stand between lawlessness and national security. How much more will we tolerate? How many more warnings do we need? The political elite claim that removing illegal immigrants must be done surgically, that we must follow their incrementalist approach rather than implementing broad enforcement measures. But the reality is clear. They did not take a measured surgical approach when they flung open the borders and allowed millions to enter illegally. Their decision was sweeping and indiscriminate, affecting every corner of the country. The response, therefore, must be equally uncompromising. Every single illegal immigrant must be subject to removal, just as every single official who enabled this catastrophe must be held personally accountable. It is time to pick our own damn fruit. The American people must be empowered to seek both legal and criminal redress against those who orchestrated this betrayal. Those who facilitated illegal immigration at the expense of their own citizens have not merely failed in their duties, they have actively undermined national security, economic stability, and public safety. Their actions should not be insulated from consequences. To level the playing field, bureaucrats who enabled this invasion must be stripped of government-backed legal protections. They should be required to defend their actions in an impartial setting, with redress being sought through independent arbitration rather than government-stacked courts. Judges and juries with vested interests in the political establishment cannot be allowed to shield these officials from the repercussions of their misconduct. The time for passive acceptance has passed. The American people must reclaim their rights, rewrite the rules, and demand real accountability. Those who have imposed hardship, chaos, and lawlessness upon the nation must now face the same scrutiny, judgment, and consequences they so readily imposed on law-abiding citizens. Justice must be restored, not as a favor, but as an absolute necessity.